Hello, everybody. How is everybody doing? Type in the chat where you are tuning in from. I want to see it. Let me know. All right. Let me send a quick reminder email to everybody here before we get started. But let me know where you all are tuning in from. Got a lot of folks. Are we in the States, Canada, both, neither? Let me know. I am super excited to talk about this topic today. We had a great session in the morning. We had high engagement. So I want to see everybody. How is everybody doing here? Awesome. We got Vignesh in Chicago. Chicago has some great, amazing pizza. So let me go ahead and email everybody here right before we get started. And we'll get started. Awesome. We got Marta in Ottawa, Canada. All right. Cool. All right. Let me send out one last email. We should be good. And we got Grace in New York City. What is going on, Grace? Awesome, everybody. So let's get started here today. So let me go ahead here and share my screen. All right. Here we go. We got the window. Share. Boom. Awesome, everybody. So welcome to the very first non-job search masterclass that we are hosting here at Consulting. This one is titled How to Get Promoted in Your First Year. And so before we get started, I want to give a quick introduction about myself. I'm Jerry, as most of you know. I'm the COO, co-founder of Consulting. I want to share with you a little bit about my story. So I started college back in 2013, and I graduated in 2017. And it was at this point where I finally began to start my career, and I sort of began to learn the ropes of what is promotion, how does this happen, and how do you sort of navigate through the ropes of the corporate world for you to get a promotion. And Rajneesh, this is the same presentation that we'll have from the morning. So after I graduated from college, I was actually the youngest analyst to be hired in my organization's history at Google, and I actually broke the organization's record for the fastest promotion in roughly about 8 months. From the time I joined it, 8 months later, I was just strategist. 6 months after that, I became a strategy and operations manager. A year after that, I was in my last role before I led product strategy for a tech company called Lucid. And all this happened before the age of 25. Today, what I want to do with you all is I hope to pull back the curtains a little bit of what I've learned of sort of navigating through a corporate ladder, how you can do well, but more importantly, how you can carve out the path so that your manager, your management team, your executives all go, wow, Rajneesh, Grace, Marta, Vignesh, they're all people who are excited, but more importantly, are ready to get that promotion. If this is what you guys came here to learn, can I get a hashtag excited in the chat to show me your energy? I am a huge extrovert, so the more energy you give me, 1,000 times, I'll throw it right back at you. So give me a hashtag excited to let me know if you're excited about this workshop as much as I am. Because if not, we're going to get started. Cool, everybody. Awesome. So before we get started, I want to share with you all the bit.ly link that we see here. And this is a spreadsheet that you all should take and use in your careers. Follow along with me, but make sure you all have this link. I just shared it here. I also have it here listed down as a commented, as a highlighted comment. So without further ado, let's get started. So everybody, who here's felt like this? Where you sort of are looking around, you start your job, and you're like, oh my gosh, I have no idea why I'm here, how I've even landed here. Type me in the chat if you felt like this when you started your job. Or maybe you might have felt like this guy over here on the right, where he's tossing all of his papers. It's like, oh my gosh, I have no idea what's going on. Things are crazy. Type me in the chat if you've ever felt like either one of these. I remember my first internship, it was actually at the CEO's house. It made me feel like, what am I doing here? This is weird. Like, this is not the thing I was thinking about. Ended up being one of the best experiences for sure. But I hope that at the end of the presentation today, that you will all be like this little puppy here who's going to jump and go straight for your promotion, because every single one of you deserve it and deserve to know how you can work towards it. So how are we going to do that today? We have 3 goals together here. Our goal number 1, we want to talk about how you can perfect your first 90 days at work. Then, which leads us to our second point. After day 90, how do you think about a career roadmap to carve the path for promotion? And of course, the last is going to be, how do you actually crush your job? All this we hope to cover today. Without further ado, let's get started on your first 90 days. So for everybody here, let me start you off with another question. What impressions do you want to have during your first 90 days? Give me some adjectives to describe what do you want your managers to think about you? What do you want your team to think about you? Type in the chat. What impressions do you want to have or leave during your first 90 days? Type in the chat. What are we thinking here? What are we thinking? Yeah. What impressions do we want to leave for everybody? Yeah. You got Big Nash, takes ownership. Absolutely, you want to be known as someone who's an owner. Fast learner, they hired the best. Absolutely. Jenny with team player. Captain with consistently going above and beyond. And of course, we have Rajneesh, star candidate with exact potential. I love that, with the exact potential, because that implies that you can continually go up. These are some of the words that came to mind for me. Hardworking, motivated, smart, dependable, nice, kind, positive, friendly, but more importantly, gets ish done. The hope is that by the end of your 90 days, that everyone thinks of you, Neha, Alyssa, Rajneesh, Captain Jenny, every single one of you, they go, wow, this person demonstrates all 9 characteristics. And that is a hope. So it begs the question, how do you do it? You might be like SpongeBob or Patrick here, you're like, how do we do it? We break it down. For us to break this down, I've actually interviewed a couple folks to really give me an understanding of how they think about their first 90 days in any job. I've interviewed the COO and president, as well as the SVP at Lucid. I've interviewed 5 directors, 2 VPs at Google. I've interviewed over 40 managers, as well as my personal experiences. And of course, it doesn't even count everyone else who I've chatted about this outside of Lucid and Google, 2 places I've worked at. And every single person has sort of led me to think about what a 30, 60, 90 looks like. So what is a 30, 60, 90? The 30 is your first 30 days. And the broad theme that we're going to be talking about here is listen. The next 30 days, question. And the last 30 days is going to be small wins. For everybody here, why is it that I didn't say, everybody, in your first 30 days, try to get as many projects, big projects, most impactful projects here as possible? Why don't we start off our first 30 days like that? To get the most impactful projects possible. Why don't we start our first 30 days like that? Is it because we don't think we're worthy enough? Is it because we have to wait for projects to be given to us? Why do we not start the first 30 days, guns blazing, we get everything out there to start? Exactly, Marta. Setting yourself up for the possible failure, not knowing your environment. Absolutely. The reason why is exactly what Mark said. You don't know how people work. You don't know the previous decisions that people have made. You don't know the previous projects that people have done. Exactly as Alyssa said. Yeah. You need to get a lay of the land, show that you are a team player. If you do not show people that you are a team player, or you don't show that you need to get a lay of the land, chances are this is going to set you up for failure. Somia, hello. Thank you for joining us. Exactly. So, let's dive into our first 30 days. But to kick us off, I want to share with you all an actual story that happened to me. So here's me, 24-year-old, bright-eyed, very excited, interviewing for my strategy role at Google. And here is my director. My director asked me a question. He asked me, how do you build trust? Think about this. If you were asked from an executive, how do you build trust? What would you say? For me, I was like, oh my gosh, I don't really know. I guess the quickest thing I could think about was I said, I would show you the data and I would use that data to inform my decision. We went a little back and forth and we ultimately landed at the Q&A section where I turned the question back to him. And I said, hey, director, what about you? How do you build trust? And his answer was something that I'll never forget. It's really stuck with me throughout the years, and it's something I always try to incorporate. But what I'm about to show you is sort of the base of what you should do for your first 30 days. So how do you build trust? He says, I build trust by listening. Most people don't get mad because their idea wasn't picked, but most people actually get mad because they feel like they haven't been heard. I build trust by listening. This is really backwards for me because I'd always thought trust was, well, I want to be well known to be that star player. I want to be that person who says yes to everything, picks up everything, and crushes it. But he sort of had the opposite point of view and said, listen, no pun intended, but I just start by listening. Right? And so, what does this lead us to? This leads us to our first action item. In your first 30 days, I want you all to set up 30-minute intro meetings with people that you will work with. So we're talking about executives, your management team, members of your team, stakeholders, as many people as you possibly can, because the goal here is for you to be friendly with everyone. So let's open up that spreadsheet that I shared with you all earlier. In the first section here, what you'll find, and let me make sure I share this with you all for those people who came in a little bit, who came in now. What you'll find here on the spreadsheet is that in your first 30 days, I listed out a couple action items that you could go out and use. But by and large, you should align or write some of these things down, share with your manager, get your manager's feedback, and just execute. And check in with your manager on a weekly basis. On your first 30 days, that is the only thing that you should be doing, talking to people. Before we move on, any questions so far? Any questions on your first 30 days? Before we talk about how you should structure these conversations, what good looks like here, we'll be covering those in the coming slides. Any questions so far? Give it a second. You know that it lags a little bit. But action item number 1, for your first 30 days, set up 30-minute intro meetings with everyone that you'll work with. Kabir asks, what should be the purpose given? Great question, Kabir. So the purpose of meeting everyone is so that you can get to know them. And I'll cover exactly how you should be structuring this in the next slide. But the whole general purpose and principle is you want to get to know them and hear them out so that you can become friendly with them. Rajnesh asks, wondering if I will get to meet stakeholders as an associate analyst. Absolutely. Doesn't matter if you're an intern, an associate, senior director, meet with as many people as possible. Monica, when there's work from home, how do we schedule intro meetings? Great question, Monica. So the thing you want to do if you're work from home is ask your manager, who are the people that I should be meeting? They'll most likely give you a list, and then you ping them, message them, email them, whatever the preferred communication style is at your company. You want to reach out to them and just say, hey, listen, I'd love to just schedule 30 minutes to get to know you. Marta asks, how would you approach execs above your direct manager for the intro calls without look like you're trying to go over their head? Marta, great question. If you worry that your manager might think that you're going over their head, the best way to do this is say, ask your manager, hey, listen, I'm trying to just get to know the lay of the land here. I'm trying to get to know as many people as possible. I'm thinking about setting some time up with executive X. What do you think? 9 out of 10 times, people are going to say, yeah, listen, for sure. Contact our admin and look at some time set. In general, most people shouldn't feel threatened if you just want to just get to know them. So I wouldn't worry too much. Great question so far. Cool. So once you set up 30-minute intro calls, you might be asking, well, Jerry, how do I actually structure these calls? And this is how I think about it. In general, you should have a 30-minute call. Intro, get to know them, and a call to action. So the intro, by far what I believe is the most underrated but most important part of a call. Breaking the ice. So similar to an interview, most people will start off the call by saying, hey, how are you? And when that happens, what is your immediate response when someone asks you, how are you? What does your gut want to say? How are you? Your response is most likely, good, how are you, right? But most people won't take the time to tell the other person how they're actually doing. For example, hey, I'm actually doing really well. I woke up this morning feeling great. I made myself a healthy breakfast, avocado toast smoothie. I'm feeling fantastic. How are you doing? The reason why this is so important, especially during an intro call, is that most people will have a front, or they'll sort of have a sort of barrier that they put up, especially to people that they don't know. And it's very common that most people will do this because, in general, people will feel like, hey, listen, I don't know you, so I want to make sure that I don't get judged. But the more that you can sort of bring that barrier for yourself, the more likely that someone on the opposite end is going to feel like they're going to lower their sort of barriers too. And once you get started after the intro, I love using this line. In the first part of Get to Know Them, I always say, I'm sure we'll have all the time to talk about work. I'd love to get to know a little bit more about you as a person or as a professional. The reason why this is so important is because you put work aside and you say, listen, I want to get to know you as a person. I want to hear you as a person and not this professional. This professional stuff will come later because you will always have time later. And chances are in your first 30 days, you probably won't even have much context to ask them specific work questions. Which moves us to our second point. Well, Jerry, okay, well, if you don't want to talk about work, what questions should I ask? These are the questions I recommend. So what's your background? What's your story? What's kept you around here? What's one advice you would give yourself if I were to start here? If you were to start here, are there some company hacks I should know? Notice how all these questions are generally around, hey, listen, I want to get to know you as a person rather than a professional. And of course, you don't want to forget that it's a conversation. Smile. It makes the world of a difference. Instead of you saying, hey, how are you? Right? You want to say, hey, how are you? Laugh. Listen more than you talk. Follow up, right? All these things are important details you don't want to miss when you have an intro phone call. And of course, last but not least, end it with an ask. If you feel comfortable. An ask could be something simple like, hey, listen, I'd love to just schedule additional time with you to maybe on a quarterly basis as I continue to onboard. Is there someone else that you recommend that I talk to? Are there resources that you recommend I look into? Something to help you feel more connected with this person so that you can touch back with them. And assuming you do all this, if you've done it right, then your calendar should look like this. You should be at as many meetings as possible, meeting as many people as possible in your first 30 days. And that's what good looks like. Any questions before we continue? Any questions? It looks like I missed a question here. Vignesh asks, how far up the hierarchy should we go? For smaller companies, you could probably go all the way up to the CEO. For bigger companies, you'll sort of get a sense of like who is that last person you should talk to. If you don't know, then the person I'd absolutely recommend you talk to is your manager. Your manager should be setting you up for success. So that. What's up, Jonathan? Can we get a hashtag JWoww in the chat? Let me know. Vignesh, would you recommend doing this the first week itself? I'd recommend that you do them in your first 90 days. Right? And this sort of goes into March's question of how are you managing these many one-on-ones with the onboarding schedule? You're absolutely right. Onboarding schedules and processes could look different across companies. Some companies will leave it very structured and they'll say, this is what you're going to do for the next 4 weeks. Other companies are going to say, hey, listen, your first week is going to look like this. Afterwards, you're on your own. If you're at that point where you do have free time, and typically companies do, you want to figure time up with just one-on-one like this. But great point. And I mean, yes, so I'm going to share share the recording. The recording will be available on this link for everyone to look at, so you'll all have it. Tiffany, what happens if I accidentally highballed my expected salary? Let's cover that at the end. So we can cover some during the Q&A section. A great question. Cool. Awesome. So after day 30, what you want to do is listen. So everybody, let's go back to our first year in college. You all are sitting here at your desks. This is me. This is JWoww. This is Serena. This is Grace. Right? And we are in Economics 101. But let's say as we're talking about economics, the professor talks about supply and demand, and is talking about how this demand curve goes downwards, the supply curve goes upwards, and you're sitting there thinking, my goodness, I have no idea what we just learned. What goes through your mind? What are some of the things that go through your mind when you're thinking, oh my goodness, I have no idea what's happening right now? And let's be real, every one of us have been there, and it's all good that we've been there. What goes through your mind? What goes through your mind? Your thoughts. Are you feeling confident? No. Exactly, Kabir. I'm not very smart. Right? Is just me or is everyone else feeling the same? Right? Exactly. When will this end? When can I go home to cry? Right? All these words come to mind. You're like, oh my goodness, I have no idea. Exactly. I got to talk to my professors. What's going on here? How can I talk to my other classmates? But most importantly, you might be thinking, my goodness, I want to ask a question, but what if everyone else gets it, but I don't? Right? And this leads into our next 30 days of questioning, quite literally, everything. Your action item here is going to be asking at least one question per meeting. And I want to share with you why. So the reason why is because during my time when I've worked with executives at Google and Lucid and other companies, the number one thing that they do across all these meetings, and this has been consistent throughout everywhere, it's been that all they do is ask questions. Yes, even the dumb ones. Literally, that's all they really do, which is sort of crazy to think about. Right? And so if the executives do it, then begs the question, well, why can't we do it? Right? And so these are the kinds of questions that you can ask to make you feel like that you don't feel dumb. This first one is by far one of the most used questions I've heard literally in every part of my career. This might be a newbie question, but I feel like we may have already covered this, but can we go over again why, right? This might be a newbie question, but can we cover why, what the goal is here? I'm a bit confused on why we pursuing this project. What drove X decision? The goal here during your next 30 days is that you want to feel comfortable raising questions, because by raising questions, you're going to build trust with everyone. How? Right? You might ask. Harvard Business Review actually shared an article back in January about how good leadership is about asking good questions. And when I share with you an excerpt that I found on this, it sort of summarizes my professional experience with asking questions. Instead, leaders should ask powerful and inspiring questions. Convey that they don't have the answers and solicit others' help to find them. The leaders I tend to talk to tend to be nervous about this approach, and won't it look like they don't know what they're doing. On the contrary, however, research has shown that expressing vulnerability and asking for help is a strong signal that you are trusting, and you're more likely to be trusted in return. In fact, if you can learn to ask questions well, it can help you connect with others. Thinking together can put you on the path to solving intractable problems and sparking innovative thinking. And I'll drop the link for this article for those people who want to read it in the chat below. But isn't that so interesting? Isn't that backwards, right? That leaders and people who are hired, they're hired because they're supposed to do the job, right? That if they're hired to do the job, then why are you asking questions? If you're asking questions, won't it look like I'm doing something wrong? It has the exact opposite effect. By you asking questions, it shows that you are asking for people's help. And what is the number one thing that people love to talk about? Number one and two. The number one thing people love to talk about is themselves. The second thing that they love to talk about is to share advice, right? So the more that you're able to show others that you don't have all the answers and you're okay asking questions, the better off you'll be. Any questions before we go through an exercise? Any questions so far? I hope you all picked it up. Asking questions, right? Any questions? Vincent, just met a senior manager on our team, had a sync, asked lots of questions. Absolutely. It's really all they do. Vignesh, is there anything like asking too many questions? How do we know we should stop in a meeting? Great question, Vignesh. The general rule of thumb is your question should not disrupt the flow of a meeting, right? It shouldn't be that you're asked, there's a debate happening and you interrupt the debate being like, so what are you guys talking about, right? You want to make sure that you find that balance. In general, I recommend about 1 to 5 questions per meeting. 5 is for sure pushing it. Naveen, what are good questions? These are the questions that I recommend. This might be a newbie question, but why are we doing this project? What goal are we trying to do? So I wish I had a list of questions, Naveen, but it really is dependent. Cool. Olivia, Olivera, you asked a question earlier. Let me go and find it here. Olivera, you asked, I start my new job tomorrow, spending the first 6 weeks in training. How do I make time for people? In general, you might, if you're in 6 weeks of back-to-back training, chances are you're probably not going to have time to meet with people, but in that training, you probably are meeting people, right? You might meet your cohort people. So if, again, this 30, 60, 90 is a general framework. Others could look like 15, 30, 45. Yours might look like 45, 75, 105, as long as you keep that general structure. Listen, question, small. Rohit asks, is there a way to gauge future growth from a manager? We're going to cover that actually in the last section here, so hopefully I'll cover it then. All right, everybody, now that you all know how to ask questions, let's say you all start at Consulting. You are now certified employees, you have signed your contracts, and you are here, and you're ready to start. You're in your meeting here, and I ask you, we're here to discuss our plans to host our second series of Consulting Speaker Series. We want to get a total of about 30,000 signups or attendees, and to get a 15% sign-up rate. What questions would you ask if you were in this meeting? What questions would you ask? Let's see what questions you would ask here. I'll relax a little bit, so I'll take a little bit of time. What question? Great question, Naveen. Who's the target audience? What is the budget for advertising? Absolutely. What was the performance for the first speaker series? How did we come up with 30,000 and 15%? What topics are most people interested in? Yeah, great questions. Who are the target audience? What are the topics? Where are we promoting it? How do we come to this metric? Yeah. How do we come to 15%? Any previous data available? Exactly. Those are all great questions, right? The way to think about questions, the way that I always think about questions is I go through word by word of what someone has asked me. If I don't fully understand what someone has asked me, I'll ask a question. So if I was part of this meeting, I would ask, sorry, this might be a really newbie question, but what is a Consulting Speaker Series? What does that entail? Right? We want to get 30,000 attendees. That seems like it's a lot. What did we get last time? 15% sign-up rate? Ooh, well, what the sign-up rate for what? Right? That's the way I think about asking questions. Dissecting every single word that someone has asked me in that question and seeing if I understood that question. Or understood that phrase that they said. So that wraps up our middle 30 days. Day 31 to day 60. Now comes to our final 30 days of getting small wins. Action item number 3, take on small projects that you know that you can do. These are ways that I recommend that you do it. Again, you don't want to start your day 61 with guns blazing, right? You want to start off slow because you absolutely want to make sure that you are consistent. You are known as someone who doesn't miss. Every time you take something on, your manager and stakeholders and teammates know that yes, Rohit, Serena, Claudia, Vincent, that you are someone that they can depend on. If you go in with guns blazing, yeah, you might have more impact, but you might miss 50% of the time. It's better for you to have smaller increments of impact, being 100% consistent, rather than being consistent 50% of the time and having large impact every now and then. So how do you get small wins? It could come to the form, it could come from joining a project, right? You might have a weekly chat with a stakeholder and they're taking on a project and you go, hey, listen, I noticed that you're taking on X project. How can I help? You might go to your manager and say, hey, listen, where can I plug in my analytical skills? And it doesn't even need to be project related. It could be that you found an article that you're like, wow, this really reminds me of the work that someone from finance is doing. I should send it over to them. Or you might say, hey, listen, I just spoke to Anna from finance, and she's working on something similar. Hey, Alyssa, let me connect you to. Right? You want to be known as someone who doesn't miss. Right? That is the goal here. It is not impact. It is reputation building. You want to make sure that in the first 90 days, that the first impression that you have are all the words that we talked about before. Right? Because again, it is better to be consistently not missing rather than being half consistent and getting impact every month. Right. So the first 90 days, these are the key takeaways. The closer you are with your colleagues, the easier your job will be. I want to share with you a quick story. So during my time at Google, I remember, so what I did was I did strategy for a business. And I said, hey, listen, our business is going to move in this direction. We need product to do this, marketing to do this, sales to do this, etc. So I remember I was trying to push down an initiative, and we forgot to get our product team signed off. They said, sorry, listen, we don't have any more bandwidth. So I went directly to the product manager. I was like, hey, or a product lead, and I said, hey, listen, I've worked with this person for 3 years. And I said, hey, listen, I really need your help here. I know that I missed a deadline. What can I do to make up for it? And she said, listen, let me see what I can do. And she eventually prioritized my project, and it was smooth sailing. Had I not been close to my colleague, that colleague would have just said, listen, sorry, you didn't submit in time. Well, that's the stuff. The closer you are with colleagues, the easier your job will be. Second, ask questions. Yes, even the dumb ones. As Vincent shared, senior manager joined his team. All that senior manager did was ask questions. If a senior manager can do it, if a CEO can do it, so can you. Ask questions. And then most importantly, do not start with your guns blazing. Start slow. It is important for you to be known as someone who doesn't miss. And that covers our first 90 days. Any questions, comments, or thoughts? I know there's a couple questions here. Rohit, you asked how to gauge future growth from a manager. I'll share with where that's going to be covered in our last slide or in the next section here. So hopefully that'll cover it. Serena says, I love the first point here. Better way to get to know your colleagues who are working on a project with them to understand their work style. Absolutely. Super important to understand another person's working style so that you can either adapt to them or that they can then adapt to you. Great points. Any other thoughts or comments or questions? In the first 90 days. Big Nash. If we are already given some huge projects to work on, should we go for small wins? I would say as long as you don't feel overwhelmed. Right? If you're given really, really huge projects to start with, awesome, just go for it, right? Make sure you don't miss those projects. But for some people, they may not have that, so you want to go for small wins. Kabir shared, I've been guns blazing for 90 days now. It's worked out really well for me. Awesome. Good for you, Kabir. Keep it up, right? For some people, this story 60-90 might look 10, 20, 30. It might be 15, 30, 45, right? So if that's worked really well for you, Kabir, keep it up. You're crushing it. Cool. Skipped intro calls, but tried asking questions when asking meeting, took initiative before reaching out before reaching 60 days. Okay, yeah, absolutely. Never too late to go back and do intro calls. Navin asks, when do you start sharing your ideas on the project with the team? Day 61 onwards. Or you could even sort of phrase it as a question. Hey team, have we thought about doing this? Have we thought about doing this project idea? This might be something that we already covered, so please forgive me, but have we considered this? Phrasing in a question is a way to make it so that there's no risk or limited risk. Beer, is there a chance I could blow up in my face? If so, how do I manage that? We're going to cover that in the last section of how to crush your job. There is a chance that it could blow up in your face, and we'll cover exactly how you prevent that from happening. How do we make sure we're getting recognition for the work we put in? Any ways you might share with management? Serena, I love that you asked this question. We're going to cover it in the last section of this presentation. Monica, if you land a contract for 6 months with the potential to hire to FTE, how would you first utilize the first 90 days? I would not do anything different. Maybe the only thing I would do differently is that I would maybe shorten the time so that it's 10, 20, 30, so that you have 5 months to execute. But in general, the first framework, I wouldn't change one bit. The next section, Monica, is what I really want you to pay attention to, because it's exactly how you should be thinking about your 6-month contract. Great question. Cool, everybody. So, section 2, the promotion roadmap. All right, everybody. Imagine you're Dora. How do you know where to go? How does Dora know where to go all the time? Type it down in the chat. How do we know where Dora's supposed to go? How does she do it? How does Dora do it? Yeah. I think I saw ask the audience. Absolutely, she asked the audience. Yeah. Exactly, Vincent, right? You got it. She gets it because of the map, right? Literally the map. Vincent, you win. Ding, ding, ding. Brownie points for you. Right? She literally uses the map to help her think about, well, how do I move from one place to the other, right? It's the exact same thing for your career, right? Now imagine you're starting in your career. How do you know where to go in the next step of your career? Whether you're going from contract to FTE, whether you're going from senior STE to staff STE, right? How do we know how to get there? It's what I call a career roadmap, or a job ladder, or other companies call it differently, but those are the 2 ways I've heard it called. Right? And so it should look something like this, where you have all the job titles that you can be promoted to. So you might start off as an associate analyst, move up to an analyst, senior analyst, and lead. And now on the other axis, you might have all the criteria and attributes that the company uses to assess whether or not you are one level or the other. So for example, let's say that you're an associate analyst. The scope of influence is really on a one-on-one basis, right? Your work directly impacts one person. Whereas an analyst, your work impacts the team. Senior analyst, multiple team, and as a lead, the entire company. Deliverables, associate analyst, data, insights, stories, and strategy. Now, why is this important for us if we're thinking about a promotion, if we're thinking about a full-time conversion? Why is this important for us to know, everybody? Why is this important for us to know? What does this help us do? Similar to Dora. How does the Dora use the map? How should we use this? Exactly, Monica. It's like the roadmap for Dora, right? So for example, right, if you're an associate analyst and you want to be promoted to an analyst, right, you literally have the steps of what you need to do to get promoted, right? For you to be brought up in the conversation of promotion, you have to be able to demonstrate that you are ready to perform at the next level. And what better way to show that you can perform at the next level by actually performing at the next level, right? Exactly. Let's up-leveling skills, Vignesh. think and perform beyond your current scope. Exactly. If you're an associate, act like an analyst. Naveen, to see what we can learn and do now to get promoted. Exactly. Right. So how do you use this to your advantage? Step number one is you want to keep yourself accountable. So what you want to do is look at the attributes that the company is grading you across and put that on the y-axis here. Scope of influence and what deliverables look like, right? And on the x-axis, you want to put your projects, product launch marketing campaign, sales productivity analytics, right? Because now what you have here is you have a grid of all the attributes and all the projects. And you then want to show people where do you fall under each of these projects? At what level have you been performing for each of these projects across each attribute? Why is this important, everybody? Why is it important for you to map every project, every task that you've done to make sure you have this? Why is that important? The reason why that's important is because we want to keep track of every project and show our managers, our leadership team, that you are already performing at the analyst levels. And if they need examples, cool. Look at these projects. Look at the impact that you've made. Right? You want to be grading yourself across these attributes, because once you do that, then the next step is you want to keep your manager accountable and make sure you and your manager are aligned, that you want a promotion and that you are going to keep track of all these projects. How do you do this? First, you want to tell your manager that your goal is to progress in your career. You don't want your manager to have to guess and be like, oh man, does Jerry really want to be promoted? Does he want more pay? Like, what exactly is he trying to solve for? Because by sharing with your manager, hey, listen, upward mobility is the most important thing. It helps shift your manager's mindset into thinking, okay, I should do what I can to make sure that I keep promoting Jerry as much as possible so that he sticks around. Number two, set up a regular time to discuss performance using your job ladder. That exact thing that we just talked about earlier. Your list of projects, all the job attributes. Discuss it with your manager on a monthly, bi-monthly, quarterly basis. Because you want to make sure your manager knows exactly where you're performing at all times, so that when it comes to performance review times, you are not surprised of what the outcome is. Set up a regular time to discuss performance and nothing else. And during those meetings, you want to discuss the career roadmap. That is quite literally the only thing that you need. Which comes to the second tab in the spreadsheet I shared with you. Right? I shared with you an example job ladder that I found online, right? And I shared with you also a project tracker. What you'll notice that I did here was I took all the job descriptions, the attributes of what it means to be an analyst, every single one of these. I put them across the y-axis. On the x-axis, I'm writing down my projects and I'm self-grading myself across each and every single one of these attributes. So that you prevent your manager from going, yeah, Naveen, hey, listen, you're doing well, you're crushing it, keep it up. To being able to say, actually, Naveen, the reason why I feel like the next step of growth for you is I want you to have project goals that go beyond. That I want you to have and define project goals with minimal supervision. That's what I want you to do. So that you know exactly what you need to do to get promoted, for you to move up to the next step, or for you to convert full time. So before we get into Q&A, I want to share with you all a quick story about my first promotion. This is the one that took me about 8 months. So, in my first 3 months at Google, you're sort of classified as what they call nooglers. Nooglers are basically new Googlers, and the expectation is that you're a negative ROI. That you really don't add that much value because you're still onboarding, especially when you're more junior in your career. So for me, when I was onboarding, all I did was hang out. I hung out with this dog named Creamy. Creamy the Corgi is actually a famous Corgi on Instagram. I ate at all the cafes, but after month 3, I began to realize, man, I'm not really doing too much here. So that's when I started my day 60 onwards, right? I met with everyone that I possibly could. I tried to get on as many projects as possible. And I remember my manager gave me a filler project. And a filler project is basically a project that doesn't really have an impact, but they're just saying, listen, just do a project because we believe that we should do a project. So what I did was my manager told me to do an industry landscape analysis. Pretty much just pull a bunch of numbers into a dashboard. That's pretty much it. So as a result of this, what I ended up finding was that there was a metric that looked like this. It went super high, and I was like, that's not supposed to happen. I went around to all my colleagues, and I was like, hey, is this supposed to be like this? And they all said, nope, go look into it. I said, okay. It turned out to be one of the biggest product loopholes that we found, and it's something that I actually won an organization award for, and I was recognized by my VP. It's crazy. Because that led me to my month 8. Because month 8 was when my manager told me, hey, listen, put me a list of all your projects because I'm ready to put you up for promotion. And I thought to myself, how can I make my manager's life as easy as possible? I put together this spreadsheet where I listed out all the attributes, every single project and task that I've worked on. And ultimately, my manager put me up, and thankfully, it went through. So for you all today, I hope that you all first, you ask your manager for a career roadmap or job ladder. Second, you start marking down and keeping track of every project and task that you have across each of these attributes and grade yourself. Last but not least, making sure you hold your manager accountable by meeting with them regularly, because that's the only way for you to get noticed by your manager. That wraps up section 2. Any questions so far? Any questions? Monica, I hope this answers your question about converting from a contract to full-time. The same principles apply when you're trying to go for full-time conversion. Look at all the attributes that your team is currently doing, making sure you have all the projects and tasks and responsibilities. Question. Megan asks, when in the 90 days would you ask your manager for a job ladder? I would do it probably sometime between day 60 and 90. Nothing too crazy. Again, you don't want to ask it on day 1 because it might give off the wrong vibe. Kabir asks, can these meetings with your manager take place in your regular one-on-one, or does it need to be separate? Kabir, I personally am a fan of making sure it's separate, because you want to show your manager, listen, I am not playing around with this. I want to dedicate this time, 100% of this time, to make sure we talk about my career progression, because that's how important it is for me. It's that important. Vignesh, does a job ladder differ a lot between companies, between small and big companies? They do. They typically don't differ between companies. They differ between functions. So like if you're a software engineer, if you're a marketing strategist, if you're a finance associate, that's how they differ. Marta, when would you want to state your intention to progress to your manager? You want to look committed to your position, not trying to move up ASAP. Marta, to be honest, I actually think it is a good thing for you to show your manager that you want to move up. Because what that signals to your manager is, okay, Marta is willing to put in the time, effort, and resources into stepping his game up. If that or her game up. So if that's the case, then you want to make sure that you telling the manager, hey, listen, I am looking forward to taking on more responsibility because then that means your manager has to do less. Serena, when my manager didn't have time, we made a compromise, and every other one-on-one was a career progress focus. Yep, loved it, love it, love it, love it. That's a great suggestion. All right, everybody. Last session, Kabir. I've been doing that since day one. I feel like that's a bad thing. Kabir, my friend, you are going with guns blazing. You are killing it with these career chats. Kabir, this last session is especially relevant for you. Sorry, one last question. Nicholas, how did you get 25-28% increase in compensation when your primary goal is to get promoted? Did you share expectations explicitly, and when? That's typically the compensation that I got when I was promoted. So at Google, you're sort of given a 5-point rating, right? I've gotten, and I think it's a shifted bell curve. So needs improvement, I think like 20% of people got. Meets expectation, 30% of people got. Exceeds expectation, 20% of people got. I think like 8% of people or 10% of people got like strongly exceeds, and only like 1 to 2% got superbs. In my first promotion review, I got a superb. I got more superbs than I have gotten meets expectations, which is why I think I got a pretty high compensation. I hope that helps. But it definitely depends on each company for sure. Cool. Let's continue moving on how do you crush your job. To get us started, I have to start off the question with you all. How do you spot a first year in college? Type in the chat. What are some signs that if you were to go back onto your alma mater, onto your college campus, if you did go to campus, how do you spot a first year? How do you spot a first year, everybody? How do you spot a first year in college? That's right. Looking around, confused, lost, curiosity, clueless, right? All those are super facts. These are some of the things that come to mind. The lanyard. How can you forget the lanyard, right? They're wearing a lanyard that has their school name on it with their little dorm key. Priceless. If you've ever dormed, right, you know one of these bad boys, the shower caddies, where you have all your shampoo and everything because you have to share the showers with everybody, right? Of course, you can't forget the stickers, right? Your college, companies, all the swag that you can get to show people, yeah. Of course, how can you forget Top Ramen? The delicious, cheap meal of college. Right. Why am I sharing this with you all? The reason why I'm sharing some of the key things that I've seen of how you notice a first year in college, in that same exact vein, it is very easy to spot a college graduate, a fresh college graduate in the workplace. So, what are some of those characteristics? Some of those characteristics, there are two that come to mind immediately. One is having this expression during meetings and not asking questions. How many people have been in meetings where you've done exactly this? Where you're like, I feel like I kind of want to ask questions, but like, I don't really know if I should because I don't want to get judged, but like, I don't know. Who here has done this? Be honest, we've all been there, right? I for sure definitely have. Second is saying yes to literally everything. Right? One of the things I've noticed with more experienced hires and people who are 5, 10, 15 years into their careers is that they'll say yes to things in the beginning because they don't have anything to do. But once they transition and they get more onboarded, they start saying less yeses start having more conversations about prioritization. We already covered what it's like to ask questions and why you should ask questions. So in this section, we're going to talk about when do you say yes, when do you say no, how do you appear as a thought partner to all your stakeholders. The goal here in this last section is that we want to avoid these mistakes, especially the one-on-one. So how do we do this? It's what I call prioritization. You have to always imagine that your bandwidth is like a cup. And I want to reiterate that it is, when I say your bandwidth, I mean it is your work time. It is not your personal time. It is not the time that you use to watch a movie. It is your work time. 40, 50, 60 hours a week, depending on the company that you're in and the role that you're in. You have to always think about this glass here. Every project that you take on fills a certain percentage of this glass. 10%, 30%, 50%. And imagine that you're already at 100% and you have another 50% project thrown onto your glass. What happens to you if your glass overfills? What happens when your glass overfills? Happens, everybody. Burnout, sadness, anger, all these come to mind through your day. I literally have had so much time to do this. It's just not enough, right? You might burn out. You're like, man, I just screw it, whatever. I don't need this job, right? You might say, man, like I don't know why I'm spending all my time at work and I'm not able to spend out time with my friends. Or you might even begin to start having some anger and being like, wow, this job sucks. This team sucks. My manager sucks. The solution here is I hope that you all are like SpongeBob here and you learn exactly how to prioritize. So let's go over exactly how to do this, right? So imagine you're One Sultan's marketing lead. This is actually a baby photo of our marketing lead, Joe, right? This is what our bandwidth looks like here. 50%, 30%, 20%, it's 100% of her time. And I go to her and I say, hey, we just launched SMS marketing. And she goes, let me take over. How could she have improved the situation? How could she have improved this situation? Could she have improved the situation? What could she have done? Ask questions. Yep. Joe, can you prioritize tasks focused? Exactly, right? That because she's already so full with the bandwidth, taking on another thing is gonna have her be angry, burn out, right? Be sad, right? So what's the solution here? The solution is you need to prioritize. And this is exactly the thought process that you should have when you think about prioritizing. So the first thing here is thinking about what is a team's North Star. If you're in marketing, it might be how many people did you reach? How many followers do you have? If you're in sales, it might be how much revenue did you generate? If you're in finance, it might be how much are we under budget, right? What is our team's North Star metric? Most people don't even know what this is, right? Once you understand that, because then now you know you go, okay, cool. If this is my North Star metric, then every project that I should be doing should be achieving that North Star metric, right? So that leads us to our second question. An OKR is basically a goal. It's basically Google's way of thinking about goal setting. The second question that you should be thinking about is what are the list of projects that we have and how much bandwidth does each project take? Because when you have those two questions answered, when you have all three of these questions answered, then all you need to do is figure out which of these projects have the most impact for my North Star and how much bandwidth is it going to take. Right? This is how you prioritize. I want to share with you exactly how you can actually go about those prioritization. Right? On the left-hand side, what you have is if you already have a full cup, then one of the solutions could be asking your manager or your leadership team for more cups, aka more people. This is how people suddenly become managers. This is how you get fast tracked to the management track. So you're identifying, hey, listen, this is what I would do if I was a manager for this team. Help me make your life easier, manager. Right? Or what you can do in this case is you reshuffle projects. In this case, we deprioritize analytics, we pick this up, now we're moving forward. Right? How exactly you see it, how exactly you do this in practice is the way that I've done this at Google is I would always have a spreadsheet. And I share this with my managers, with my stakeholders, with my exec teams, and this is exactly what I have. Project name. What are the deliverables that you're gonna have for the project? Who's gonna work on it? And how much time is this gonna take? And I send this out to everyone who works with me. Similarly, right, when you think about these percentages, you might want to ask your manager for help. Listen, I don't really know how to estimate these percentages. What percent do you think is reasonable? And this prevents you from making sure you go above and over the cup, right? And similarly, these aren't just limited to projects. These could be tasks. For example, if you're customer support and you have to constantly talk to customers, add that in here too. Everything that requires more than 10% of your time. And of course, you want to have a list of deprioritized projects. Projects that you're going to take on later. The reason why it's important to have a list of deprioritized projects, right, is because inevitably you're going to want to say no. And these are some of the buzzwords that I use. If someone comes to you and says, I have a super urgent task, can you take this on? The response I always share is, my balance is a bit full, but I'd be happy to discuss it with my manager to see if I could drop other projects. Or I'm happy to see how I can push it out to next quarter. Same thing with something else. Someone says, hey, listen, this isn't urgent, but I haven't asked. You can say, listen, I'm happy to put this on in the project backlog and loop you in once you're approaching time. Notice how I never say no here. Notice how I'm not saying, hey, listen, I'm not helping you at all. It's all collaborative, right? And that's the goal here. Same thing with decreasing your workload, right? I have a couple buzzwords that I recommend you use here. So again, how do you actually go about doing this? Key takeaways for crushing your job. Always, always, always think about how full your glass is. Here, this is exactly what my potential worry could be for you, right? That if you start out with guns blazing, your bandwidth is going to be already at 100%. And then people are going to ask you to collaborate. You're going to say no because I'm already working on these huge projects, which is fine, but you want to appear as a collaborator. And you don't want to say yes to everything because then your glass is going to be full and it's going to overfill. Right? You want to document every single project that you work on. Why? Because this goes back to our second session, right? So second section, where we have a list of all the projects that you have done and all the job attributes. You want to make sure you go about and document. And of course, you always want to ask questions and be willing to help. Being willing to help is arguably one of the most important things that you want to do as you're sort of thinking about getting promoted and getting the buy-in from the people that you work with. And that, my friends, is how you can get promoted in your first year of work. We've gone from the first 90 days to figuring out your career roadmap, but also simultaneously doing well in your job. Any questions, everybody? Exactly, Serena. No can mean not now. Absolutely right. Absolutely right. Any more questions, comments, or thoughts? Give it a little second. Here says, I'm trying to get a raise. I've seen a lot of numbers. I'm trying not to over undershoot it. Great question, Kabir. First, I think it's great that you're trying to get a raise. The way to do this is exactly what we talked about before, right? Where in the job ladder do you fall? Are you an analyst or a senior analyst or a lead? If you're either one of them, right, you want to show through your projects that you are a senior analyst or an analyst. The reason why that's important is because then you want to be able to show, okay, cool, I'm supposed to be a senior analyst, and this is what a senior analyst typically gets paid. This is what a senior analyst's fair market rate is. You have data to support that. You have documentation to prove that you're operating as a senior analyst. That's how you approach conversations about raises. Hopefully, Kabir is going to be easy for you because you've been killing it, right? Any other questions before we close this out? Kabir, get the average. If every website says something different. With that, everybody, thank you so much for your time and attention. I hope you all learned something today about how do you approach promotion, how do you do well in your job, how do you use a job ladder to progress in your career. Was that helpful, everybody? I hope it was helpful. For those gold members, I'm going to send out an email by tomorrow. And for everybody here who's tuning in, who's watching later, thank you. The link will always be available on the same link that you're on now. And with that, I hope everybody has a wonderful evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you are in the world. And thank you so much for investing in us and coming here. Thank you, everybody. Talk soon.